The rejection letter still burned in my pocket as I sat in the corner booth of Murphy's Diner, nursing my third cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. 3 months since I'd failed the Coast Guard rescue swimmer selection. 3 months since I'd been told I wasn't strong enough, wasn't fast enough, wasn't cut out for saving lives in the churning waters of the Atlantic. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Not everyone's built for it, Chen, Commander Rodriguez had said, his voice not unkind but final. Takes a special kind of person to jump out of a helicopter into 20-foot swells. Maya Chen, 26 years old. Former college swim champion. Certified Empton, and apparently not special enough. I traced the rim of my coffee mug with my finger, watching the steam rise and dissipate. Outside, Portland's harbor stretched into darkness, its waters deceptively calm under the amber glow of the dock lights. 3 years I'd trained for rescue swimmer selection. 3 years of predawn swims in frigid water, of pushing my body beyond its limits, of dreaming about the moment I'd earn those silver wings. The bell above the diner's door chimed, and I glanced up to see Tommy Brennan sliding into the booth across from me. His Coast Guard uniform was rumpled, his red hair sticking up at odd angles. "Still hiding out here?" he asked, signaling the waitress for coffee. "I'm not hiding, I'm reflecting on what? How to turn caffeine into a career." Despite my mood, I almost smiled. Tommy had been my swimming partner since we both arrived in Portland, the only other person who understood the specific brand of failure that came with washing out of rescue swimmer training. "Got a call tonight," he said, stirring sugar into his coffee. "Fishing vessel in distress about 40 miles out. Stella Maris. Engine failure, taking on water." I looked up, and 3-person crew. Captain's got a bad heart, been having chest pains. The other 2 are his son and daughter-in-law, both in their 20s. "Tommy, why are you telling me this?" He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Because the weather's turning. 20-foot swells building to 30 by midnight. Wind gusting to 60 knots. He paused. "And we're short-staffed." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. How short-staffed? Johnson's out with food poisoning. Martinez is handling a medevac in Bar Harbor, and Peterson ... double quotes. Tommy rubbed his face. "Peterson's rescue swimmer suit expired last week. Paperwork got screwed up." The diner suddenly felt too small, too warm. "Tommy, what are you asking me?" "I'm not asking anything." His blue eyes met mine. "I'm just saying that sometimes life gives you chances you weren't expecting." I stared at him. "I failed, remember? Washed out, not cut out for it." "You failed a test," he corrected. "Doesn't mean you can't save lives." 20 minutes later, I was jogging through the base gate, my civilian clothes replaced by a borrowed flight suit that was too big in the shoulders and too short in the legs. My hands shook as I pulled on the rescue harness, muscle memory from months of training taking over, even as my mind screamed that I had no business being here. Lieutenant Sarah Park briefed us as we walked to the helicopter. She was compact and intense, with the kind of quiet confidence that came from years of pulling people out of impossible situations. "Stella Maris is a 40-foot fishing boat," she said, having to shout over the growing wind. "Lost power 3 hours ago. They're running on emergency bilge pumps, but it's not keeping up with the water coming in." I climbed into the MH-65 Dolphin helicopter, my legs feeling disconnected from my body. The crew chief, a grizzled master chief named Walsh, handed me a helmet. "You sure about this, Chen?" he asked, his weathered face serious. "It's one thing to train in a pool. Another thing entirely out there." I thought about lying, about pretending. I felt ready. Instead, I just nodded. The helicopter lifted off into the storm, and within minutes we were flying through a wall of rain and wind that turned the world outside into a gray-black void. I pressed my face to the small window and watched the ocean below, its surface torn and twisted by the storm into something that looked more like liquid mountains than water. ETA 15 minutes. Park's voice crackled through the cum system. I closed my eyes and tried to center myself the way I had during training. Breathe in for 4 counts, hold for 4, out for 4. But my breath kept catching in my throat, and all I could think about was Commander Rodriguez's voice. Not everyone's built for it. Chen. Park's voice was sharp, focused. You with us? I opened my eyes and met her gaze. Yes, ma'am. Good, because we've got eyes on the vessel, and it's worse than reported. I looked out the window and saw the Stella Maris below us, a small white speck being tossed around like a toy. Even from this height, I could see it was listing heavily to one side, waves washing over the deck with each swell. Hoist basket deployment in 60 seconds, Walsh announced. My mouth went dry. During training, we'd practiced basket rescues dozens of times, but those had been in controlled conditions, with instructors watching every move, safety divers in the water as backup. This was different. This was real. The helicopter descended until we were hovering maybe 60 feet above the fishing boat. The downwash from our rotor blades whipped the already chaotic water into a frenzy, and the Stella Maris rocked violently beneath us. First rescue, Park announced. Elderly male, possible cardiac event. Chen, you're going down. This was it. The moment where I either proved I belonged here or confirmed every doubt that had been expressed about my abilities. I clipped into the rescue basket, feeling the familiar weight of the harness and the solid reassurance of the equipment I'd trained with for 3 years. Remember, Walsh said, his hand on my shoulder, slow and steady. The boat's moving, but you've trained for this. Had I, though? I'd trained for controlled descents onto stable platforms. This was chaos, wind howling, waves crashing, the boat pitching at impossible angles. But as Walsh lowered me toward the deck, something clicked. My body remembered the hundreds of training hours, the muscle memory that had been drilled into me through repetition and failure and getting back up to try again. I absorbed the motion of the boat through my legs and core, adjusting to its rhythm like I was dancing with it. The crew of the Stella Maris was waiting for me on deck, a woman in her 20s with terror in her eyes, a younger man who looked like he was fighting seasickness, and between them, an older man clutched his chest, his face gray with pain. Captain O'Brien, the woman shouted over the wind. He collapsed about an hour ago, says his chest feels like it's on fire. I knelt beside the captain, my EMP training taking over. His pulse was rapid and irregular, his skin clammy. Classic. Signs of cardiac distress, made worse by the stress and physical demands of trying to keep his boat afloat. We're going to get you out of here, I told him, having to shout to be heard. But I need you to stay calm. Getting him into the rescue basket was like trying to perform surgery in an earthquake. The boat pitched and rolled with each wave, and twice I had to grab the rigging to keep from being thrown overboard. But I managed to secure the captain, signaling to Walsh that we were ready. As the basket lifted off the deck with Captain O'Brien. Inside, I felt something I hadn't experienced during any of my training, pure, undiluted purpose. This wasn't about passing tests or earning approval. This was about a human being whose life hung in the balance. The second rescue was the captain's daughter-in-law, Sarah. She was in better physical condition, but nearly paralyzed with fear. I can't, she kept saying as I tried to get her into the basket. I can't do this. Yes, you can, I told her, holding her hand steady as another wave crashed over the deck. Look at me. We're going to do this together. Something in my voice must have gotten through to her, because she nodded and let me help her into the basket. As she was lifted away, she caught my eyes and mouthed, "Thank you." The third rescue should have been routine. Danny, the captain's son, was young and strong. But as I was preparing to signal for the basket to come back down, A massive wave bigger than anything we'd seen so far slammed into the Stella Maris. The boat rolled violently to starboard, and I heard the sickening sound of something breaking deep in the hull. When we righted, the deck was awash with water, and the boat was riding noticeably lower. "She's going down fast," Danny shouted. "Maybe 5 minutes before she goes under completely." I looked up at the helicopter, now fighting to maintain position. In worsening conditions. The basket was coming down, but slowly, too slowly. At this rate, the Stella Maris would be underwater before we could complete the rescue. That's when I made a decision that went against every protocol I'd ever learned. I unclipped from my safety line. "What are you doing?" Danny asked, his eyes wide. "Getting you ready to swim," I said, pulling off my flight helmet and tossing it aside. "That basket isn't going to reach us in time." I'd spent 3 years training to be dropped into the water from helicopters. I'd failed the test, but I'd never failed the swimming part. In the water, I was in my element. "Danny, I need you to listen to me very carefully," I said, grabbing him by the shoulders. "When I say jump, we're both going overboard. I'm going to tow you to that basket, and they're going to pull us both up." "Are you insane? Those waves are 30 feet high," I interrupted. "In 2 minutes, they're going to be rolling over where this deck used to be. We can take our chances in the water, or we can go down with the ship." As if to emphasize my point, another wave crashed over the bow, and the Stella Maris shuddered like a living thing in pain. Danny looked at the churning water, then at me. "You can really do this?" "I can do this." We jumped. The water was a shock cold enough to steal my breath and rough enough to slam me around like I was inside a washing machine. But I'd trained in conditions almost this rough, and my body knew what to do. I grabbed Danny, locked my arm across his chest in the classic rescue hold, and started swimming toward where the basket waited, maybe 30 yards away. 30 yards. Had never felt so far. Each wave lifted us up like we were riding an elevator, then dropped us into a trough where the helicopter disappeared behind walls of water. Danny was struggling, fighting me, making the rescue harder than it needed to be. "Stop fighting," I shouted in his ear. "Let me do the work." Halfway to the basket, a wave bigger than the rest caught us wrong, spinning us around and driving us both underwater. For a moment, in the churning darkness, I lost my grip on Danny. I kicked hard, breaking the surface, and saw him maybe 10 feet away, panic in his eyes. This was the moment. The moment that would define whether I truly was built for this. I dove, underwater. The chaos of the storm was replaced by an eerie calm. I could see Danny sinking, his heavy clothes and boots dragging him down. I kicked harder than I'd ever kicked in any pool, reaching him just as he was starting to lose consciousness. I dragged him to the surface, secured my grip, and resumed swimming toward the basket. My lungs burned, my arms felt like lead, but I kept going, because this wasn't about me anymore. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about getting Danny O'Brien home to his family. We reached the basket just as my strength was beginning to fail. Walsh and the crew chief hauled us both up, their faces grim with concentration as they worked against the storm. As the helicopter banked away from the sinking Stella Maris, I caught a final glimpse of the fishing boat disappearing beneath the waves. 2 minutes later, there was nothing left but churning water and foam. The flight back to base passed in a blur. Danny was conscious but hypothermic, wrapped in emergency blankets. I sat in the jump seat, my borrowed flight suit dripping salt water, trying to process what had just happened. "Chen," Park's voice came through the comm system. "Nice work out there." I nodded, not trusting my voice to respond. It wasn't until we were on the ground, walking across the tarmac in the early morning light, that the full impact hit me. 3 people were alive because I'd been there. 3 families wouldn't be planning funerals this week. Commander Rodriguez was waiting for us at the hangar, his expression unreadable. "I heard what happened out there," he said as I approached. still wearing the too large flight suit. "Sir, I know I wasn't authorized." He held up a hand. "Chen, what you did tonight. Jumping into those conditions without proper authorization. Risking not just your own life, but potentially complicating the rescue." He paused, and I felt my heart sink. It was either the bravest thing I've ever heard of, or the stupidest. I waited. "Probably both," he continued. "But 3 people are alive because of it." He looked at me for a long moment. "Maybe we were too quick to judge what you were built for." 6 months later, I earned my rescue swimmer wings. Not because I'd gotten stronger or faster, but because I'd learned something that couldn't be taught in a pool or measured on a standardized test. Sometimes being built for something isn't about meeting someone else's expectations. Sometimes it's about being there when lives hang in the balance and refusing to let fear decide what you're capable of. I keep a photo on my desk now, Captain O'Brien, with his family at his granddaughter's first birthday party. Danny and Sarah at their wedding anniversary, all of them healthy and whole. On the back, in Danny's handwriting, it says, "Thank you for jumping." The night I failed rescue swimmer selection, I thought my story was over. But sometimes the most important chapters of our lives begin with failure. Sometimes what looks like an ending is really just a beginning we weren't expecting. Learn that the measure of a person isn't whether they fail, but what they choose to do when failure tries to define them. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, life gives you a second chance to prove you were built for something after all. Every morning now, I wake up before dawn and run down to the harbor. I look out at those dark waters that once seemed so intimidating. And I remember the night I learned the difference between being qualified and being ready. Qualifications can be measured and tested. Readiness lives in the moment when everything falls apart and you choose to jump anyway. I'm Maya Chen. I failed Coast Guard rescue swimmer selection. And then I saved 3 lives in the worst storm of the decade. Some failures are just the beginning of who you're meant to become.